Welcome to video 6 from chapter 9, where we will talk about bilingualism and bilingual education. So, first of all, one of the amazing findings is this first point that young children learning two languages simultaneously reach milestones at about the same time as those learning one. For a long time, there was an argument put forth against children learning a second language early in life that it would interfere with the learning of their original native language. And so to learn, if you were to learn two languages at once, you would have deficits in both languages and be like you just partially learn each language. And it was always thought that you would lag behind all the other uh, children that are only learning one language in your language skills. So that was the common thinking, and I don't blame that thinking, because if you're learning twice as many vocabulary words and twice double the amount of syntax and grammatical rules and things like that, it just seems like it would take a lot longer to become proficient in two languages versus one. So this was kind of an amazing discovery, that was found through research, that there are really little to no deficits to learn two languages early in life versus learning one. That you learn them. You can learn two languages at an equal pace than learning one. I mean, it almost doesn't make sense, but this is what research has shown: is that our brains are well equipped to do that. Particularly, once again, the earlier you start, the better. So, a child that starts learning, let's say, a second language right from infancy, because maybe they have two languages spoken in their home, I mean, they show absolutely no deficits, or they don't fall behind on one or the other language. I mean, they become natural bilinguals that are proficient in both. But even past, it doesn't have to be right from infancy, but the earlier in life that children start, the more easily they can learn two languages at the same time. And based on these research findings, that uh, there it led um, some countries to offer more um, bilingual options, right from the start of schooling, and in some cases right from the start of preschool, um, in order to teach children the second language when they can best learn it. The older you get, the harder it becomes to learn a second language. I don't know if anyone's tried, in your adolescence or adulthood, to pick up a second language. It's difficult. It's a lot of study, and it doesn't feel, natural. Whereas young children, they can do it quite easily. Um, Coming from Canada, I can mention that there's widespread bilingual programs available in many schools. It's not across across the whole country or across the whole curriculum, but there are many programs offered because Canada has two official languages, right? English and French. Um, Whereas in the United States, I mean, we we have very limited bilingual programs because uh, although the U.S. has no official language, unofficially we are very much an English first, or you know, and many people believe an English only type country, um, and so there is been hesitancy to teach other languages from the start of schooling. It does exist, but it's not widespread by any means. Um, Besides the fact that you can learn two languages at an equal rate and to equal proficiency as learning one, there's also some evidence that early bilingualism gives a global cognitive advantage, that learning two languages gives you other cognitive advantages. I'm aware, let me just point out that the PowerPoint that I put online, it hadn't been corrected yet. It said no strong evidence. So make sure you make that change. There is certainly some evidence that bilingualism has other cognitive benefits, particularly in executive function, which is kind of controlling, it's your control center. I've talked about a little bit in the past. It's what controls your attention um, and decision making and I don't know, kind of problem solving abilities. So that's a very important part of the brain, or very important process, I should say, of the brain is the executive function process. And the other thing I add shows up with advantages is cognitive flexibility, and this makes sense. Cognitive flexibility involves shifting your attention from one task to another. And obviously a bilingual, somebody that is an early bilingual, they are constantly shifting from one language to another. And so this is why they improve in cognitive flexibility, is they're used to kind of shifting from one system of thinking to another system of thinking, because they constantly do that if they're switching from one language to another, or interpreting from hearing one language to what the word would be in another language. They tend to be very flexible thinkers. And so there's quite a bit of evidence that cognitive flexibility is improved by learning two languages early. So given all this, I mean, you can learn two languages as fast as one. It all has other cognitive benefits. It would make sense to me that there should be far, far more bilingual type programs that begin right from the start of schooling. And that our old fears that it would interfere with, first language learning, it turns out, because they're unfounded, it seems to only offer benefits and no real drawbacks. Okay. One thing that's also in favor of early second language learning is that if you learn a second language prior to adolescence, it improves certain aspects of that language. Just to give you one example, if you learn, during childhood, you can learn to speak without an accent. Whereas once you reach adolescence or adulthood, you will always, carry an accent as you learn when you learn a second language, and you won't sound like a native speaker. But a childhood bilingual, they can sound like a native speaker in both languages. So let's look at some of the education programs we do have. And what we're going to concentrate on is people in the United States having to learn English and what kind of bilingual programs we offer to them. In the US, the ultimate goal of bilingual classrooms is to transition students eventually into monolingual English classrooms. So these programs are about, how do we get a non-English speaker transitioned into English only. And so these programs are not like most of these programs are not true bilingual programs in the sense that you're promoting, learning in two languages. They're more about, let's get these people speaking English and within our classrooms. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, the U.S. is strongly favors English as the main language to be spoken and learned in. So there's 5 different programs here. There's different I'll go through them. There's like, some of them are similar to each other, but they all have little differences. We'll begin with immersion programs. This is when when the non-English speaking child, is taught completely in English. So they're put into regular classrooms and are taught completely in English, and are expected to learn the language, just through exposure to it. So there's no specific teaching of English. Immersion does work, and once again, particularly the younger the child, the better it tends to work. We all can learn a second language in an immersion situation. If you were to move, let's say, to a completely Spanish-speaking country and everyone used that, and you would be forced to learn the language. It just when you hear the language every day and you have to communicate with others, and you'll pick it up a little bit at a time as you go and try to communicate to people as you shop and as you do your banking and as you do just your life skills. You basically are forced to learn the language, and so immersion situations, people do learn second language. It can be very tough though if there's absolutely no background in the language that you're immersed in. So a child being put into an immersion program, if they have absolutely no English background or former training in English, it can be very tough and frustrating transitional period for them. But like I said, it eventually will work. And if the child's young enough, they will pick up the language quicker. This is what language learning is one of those interesting things that, for almost every skill you can think of, for most skills you can think of, the older you are, the better you're going to be at learning it. An older child can learn certain math obviously easier than a younger child because they have more background and things like that. But learning a second language is actually easier the younger you are. You learn things quicker when you're younger compared to being older, because all the knowledge we gain, as we become older, it doesn't really apply in most cases to that second language. So it doesn't give you an advantage that you have, you've lived for 20 years versus a child that's only lived for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Their brains are set up to learn language, whereas you've passed the point where your brain's expecting, to be learning a language. And so it's more of a forced procedure when we get older. Okay, rather than more natural for younger children. Okay, so immersion programs throw the child into all English. Then we have ESL pull-out programs. This is when the children once again attend a regular all English classroom similar to the immersion program, but they are pulled out for part of the day and taught English in a separate classroom. So there is some specific teaching of English during parts of the day. And then the other parts of the day are like the immersion program. Okay. And once again, this would be better for a child that has no background in English at all. If they have background, then the immersion program may work better for them. But it's if a child has absolutely no experience, then that extra teaching in English for part of the day is really going to help them with the immersion process. Okay, so in these first two examples, there's no direct instruction in the child's native language. In these last three, we're going to see that, part of the instruction is in the native language. In the transitional bilingual education programs, these are meant to be the most rapid transitional programs. They get some instruction in their native language, just so that they're not falling behind on some basics like, learning numbers and learning early math skills and things like that. So there's some instruction in their native language, but they have concentrated instruction learning English. So they actually spend more time learning English each day in school than anything else. And so this is meant to be the quickest program. It's meant to, let's transition them to speaking English as fast as possible by really, spending most of the day teaching English, and we can get them where they need to be in a shorter amount of time. Okay, a similar kind of program that where there's instruction both in English and in their native languages is the developmental bilingual programs, but these are more gradual, longer type programs. In these programs, they get most of their instruction in school is in their native language. So it's meant, this kind of program is meant to make sure that the child's not falling behind in learning, other academic skills and priorities, and then they also learn English at the same time. But it's just a switch in the ratio. The transitional program is mostly English teaching and a little bit in their native language. The developmental bilingual programs is mostly in their native language, and then a little bit of English training every day as well. And then we have the two-way immersion programs. I like this one. I'll give you an example from in Rochester here. This is where you have the classroom split into native and non-native English speakers, and they get paired together in the classroom. So you try to get a fairly equal mixture of English, native English speakers and others that are non-native, and both languages are used in instruction. So they kind of switch back and forth. So it's not only meant to teach, and let me just use Spanish as an example. It's the main type of two-way immersion program in the United States. So you have a lot of Spanish-speaking children, you have a lot of English-speaking children, and so some of the instructions in Spanish, some's in English, and so it's meant to teach the Spanish kids English, but at the same time you are teaching the English children Spanish, and so it goes back and forth. They kind of split up the instruction. Maybe one day is all in English and the next day is all in Spanish. An example is the HOLA program, HOLA, HOLA, and I know somewhat about it because we enrolled my daughter into the HOLA program when she started school. School number 12 in Rochester was a school that had this program throughout, starting in kindergarten and running throughout all of elementary school. And we specifically looked for this program because I believe in learning a second language early in life, even though I never did. But I do believe it's very beneficial to any child. And so my daughter, went through up until grade 5 until she switched schools. She was in the HOLA program, year after year, and had a great beginning in learning the Spanish language. And she's 14 now and a very strong Spanish student and speaker. So that kind of program, that's similar to a lot of the programs that they do in Canada, where they really do a mix, and where English students, there are English children that their parents want them to learn French, and there are French students put in that, and their parents want them to learn English, and so this is kind of meant to be equal benefits to all the children in the classroom. So it's not about just teaching English to children that are non-native English speakers, but also teaching Spanish to the English students. It's very much in high demand, this HOLA program. They always have less spots available than the demand. I mean, they have to sometimes turn away some families. I believe that we should have more of these type programs available. Okay, so try to keep straight the 5 different programs here. I know there's a lot of overlap between them, but they certainly can ask you to identify one of them on the test. I'm not going to spend too much time here on this final screen of this video, but obviously when families immigrate to a different country, they bring their culture and their language with them, and parents naturally want their children to succeed in their new country, and to transition and learn the language that they need in the new country. But also, it makes sense. Parents want to maintain their heritage language as well, and this is why when parents feel strongly about maintaining that the child maintain their first native language. I mean, some of these programs are better than others. They probably would not opt for an immersion program where there's no instruction at all in the native language. They would probably want either the transitional or the developmental or the two-way program where the child, still receives training and, some instruction in their native language so they can hold on to that language while also learning English. And it's, it's obvious, if you put yourself in the shoes of somebody immigrating. I mean, if I was to go to, I don't know, some European country and it was all Spanish speaking or German speaking or whatever, I mean, I'd want my children to learn the new language as I learned it as well, but I wouldn't want them to forget English. I wouldn't want them to not, maintain their original language. So I think it's very natural that this occurs with families that they prefer bilingual programs that where some instruction occurs in their original language if they're available. Like I said, the U.S. is not a strong bilingual education country. It's much more common in European countries. That many countries support bilingual education there much more so than in the United States, and it makes sense. We're kind of isolated, in a little bit isolated. The U.S. is this big, massive country, and whereas like if you look at the European countries, they're all surrounded by other countries. I mean, they're in close contact. It's easy to move from one country to another, and and there are multiple languages. Native languages throughout Europe. So bilingualism is much more common there. Okay, and this will conclude video 6 from chapter 9.